Hi, everyone. This interview you're about to watch is with a Utah woman named Amber Washington. She is a victim and survivor of sexual abuse and has felt silenced for decades. She's now sharing her story to help others feel seen and heard. I do want to let you know that our discussion contains conversations of sexual abuse, and that may be triggering for some.
Is that your book?
Yeah, it's my book.
So when you hold that book and you're looking at that book, what thoughts come to mind?
It's super surreal to see your story in pages to begin with. But then to know how well received this book has been is phenomenal, because when I started writing this, I really wrote it with the intention of like helping survivors, right? And that's definitely something that I strive to do. I didn't think that it would be read by other people, you know, and the people that are reading this, I'm tracking all of that. So over 30% of my readers are men. And even different cultures, ages, like it's all over the place. And so it's been really cool just to see how well received the book is. And it's a hard read, you know, and there will be people that can't read it, but to the people that are holding space for it and are finding themselves in these pages, because it's not just about sexual abuse, it's not just about sexual violence, it's about, you know, so much different trauma that comes just from a family system, from a religious system, from the court system, you know, so many different things, marriage, divorce, that I think that motherhood, you know, and raising 3 boys. There's so much in my story that that people are finding something in it to relate to.
So what for you is this book about?
This book is about voice. More than anything, this was my way of reclaiming my voice. I was almost 9 years old when I disclosed, which is something that's very rare for children to disclose, you know, while abuse is happening. And the other thing that was really unique about my story is that my grandfather admitted to the abuse. He initially denied it, and then he admitted it. And so we, you know, went to court, and he took a plea in abeyance and was given a year of probation. No sex offender registry. Granted, this was 1989, 1990, but virtually a slap on the hand, you know, and as soon as court was resolved, I was treated like it wasn't supposed to affect me, and that I wasn't supposed to talk about it again. And so much of this book explains what happens when there is silence, when a child is not given the correct resources, community, support to heal. And one of the things that I have found just in doing research about trauma, and especially childhood sexual abuse, is that kids really do have a good chance at healing and working through something even as traumatic as childhood sexual abuse when they are given those right resources and community support and the things that it takes for us to heal. So much of this book is about what came after, because I've said it, I say it, and I'll continue to say it, but the sexual abuse was traumatic and that was harmful, but what came after, the way that it was handled, the way that it was not handled, did 10 times more damage than the abuse itself.
And you were how old when you were first abused?
I believe I was around 7. That's the one part of the timeline that, you know, I remember being young, and I can recall now understanding what grooming is. I can recall different touches, sitting on laps, you know, things that were done in the open, you know, so it was seemingly very normal affection. And then, so it's really, I mean, it's impossible for me truly to pinpoint when the abuse really began, but I know for a fact that it was right before my 9th birthday when I disclosed.
What was it like for you to not be heard or feel heard from, you know, whether it's the people closest to you in your life and, you know, family, friends? What was that feeling like to not have people hear your voice and your pain?
I felt dramatic. I felt too much. I felt crazy, and I remember being about 15 years old and wanting to write a book, And yet, when I wanted to write that book, it was because I had taken this stance of, oh, look, my trauma didn't affect me, like I'm fine. So I can tell other people that, oh, it's not really that big of a deal, and how damaging would that have been had I actually, shared that message at any point in my life. But that was the gaslighting. That was the way that everything was treated. And so I internalized that myself and just was like, you're not a victim. You're a survivor. Like, look at you. It didn't really affect you, not having any way to understand at the time the damage that had been done and was continuing to be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now that I guess let me go back to before this book came out.
Yeah.
So I was talking to you about just getting to the point where you could openly talk about it.
Yeah.
When was that moment for you where you said, because it'd been years, right, as a young girl, and then processing that, when did you feel like, I can tell this and people are listening
Oh
to
gosh.
me?
As you're asking me that question, I actually have I have a memory of being on the stand at church, during fast and testimony meeting and saying things without directly saying them. I do remember being young and wanting people to listen to me because I hadn't been heard in the way, I hadn't been validated. And so that's just such an interesting question because it's making me think about like all the different times where I was asking for help, and that came out in any way you could imagine, in kind ways, and me directly asking, indirectly, being upset, rebelling, all of those types of things. In 2022, I was working for a tech company, and I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine, and he was doing some things outside of work, but with his daughter's high school. And really, he was helping them learn Linux, but one of the things that he said was, I'm not just teaching them Linux, like I'm also trying to teach them like life skills. And through this conversation, I was like, oh, that'd be cool. I would really love to share my story about how I got into tech because I don't have a college degree. I kind of tripped into tech, very fortunately. And so the more I started thinking about this, I was like, oh, I feel like I could maybe help some kids see that you don't have to take traditional paths, to find a career. But the more that I thought about it, the more I was like, if I'm going to share this story, I want to share all of it, because especially in talking to kids, I think the older we get, we think, oh yeah, no, I remember what it was like to be a teenager. I can relate, but I knew that they would see through me if I went in and said, hey, look at me, I didn't go to college, and yet I'm making over 6 figures, and you can do that too. I didn't want to just show the pretty parts of my life, and so I approached my CEO at the time, Melissa DiDonato, and she got right back to me, and she said, yes, let's share your story a little bit more. And so she really opened the door, and I spoke to our Women in Tech group and was able to share a little bit more of my story. So in the world of tech, or even corporate to begin with, that's the last place that I ever would have expected to share this story. And yet when I did that, it opened something in me. It opened something in the colleagues that held space for that story. And it really showed me the power of sharing your story. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't until, that was 4 years ago now, where I really started to publicly share my story.
So for decades, you were essentially holding it in or not feeling validated when you would express it.
Definitely not feeling validated, because if I would try to express it, it was shut down, and it would usually combust into usually a fight with my father, and I would isolate myself from the family, and then I'd bring us all back together because I wanted that family unity. So it wasn't until 2022 when I said, okay, I'm going to do this with or without your blessing.
What was that moment like when you could share that and actually people listened and validated you?
Yeah, it was life-changing. It was life-changing, and it was prepping to share my story that led me to begin writing this book, because I did so much research, gathered timelines, court papers, talked to my mom and my grandma, anybody that would have a conversation with me. You just asked me, like, when did this start? there were so many different things in my head that I was like, if I'm going to write a book, I have to be as precise as possible. And so yes, I had done a lot of research and had done a lot of planning just to share, an hour conversation. So I took that information, took a week and a half off, and just started writing. And in that week and a half, I had over 40,000 words, and I had my first rough draft that is very, very different from what I ended up developing. But that was just such a pivotal part of this entire journey. And again, the power of sharing the story and the things that colleagues were sharing with me, it was incredibly humbling. And still to this day, like, I will always be humbled and honored when somebody chooses to share, not just chooses, but trusts that they can share something so personal with me. And I hold that in deep regard.
Was the writing and the release somewhat healing and therapeutic as well for you?
Incredibly. I've done therapy for years now, but healing is not just talk therapy. Healing, and we don't heal in isolation, and I think that was the biggest thing that came out of sharing my story publicly, is all of the sudden I saw people that understood. I attended a retreat at Sapria. Sapria is a nonprofit located here in Utah, but they have services. I think they're about ready to take it international, actually.
Awesome.
But they do host a retreat here, and then at the time that I went, they had one in Georgia. And attending the retreat at Sapria with 7 other women who had been sexually abused as children as well, I remember sitting in a group session, and one of the women was sharing something very personal and very, what I felt like was shameful, and I just looked at her and I just said, "You mean I'm not alone?" And something that just feels so embarrassing, understanding that other people were having similar behaviors, or you just knew that you weren't alone.
Yeah, that's how much did that play a role in wanting to bring this even more public with the book?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a huge part of it, between sharing my story at work and the feedback that came there, and then attending the retreat at Sapria. One of the things that I saw at Sapria was that every woman that was there, and we had some women that were in their 20s, some of us that were in their 40s, and then we had some that were in their 60s. So it was fascinating to see even just the different ages and stages of healing. And my roommate, same age, was just coming to grips with what had happened to her as a child, which is very normal for women in their 40s and 50s to remember things that they have completely blocked out. That's actually the norm compared to disclosing, while things are going on. And I realized that I had maybe a superpower, maybe a blessing, I don't know, but I had the ability to speak for people who were not as far along in their journey, or just even, it's not that it's not scary, because it is, and it's emotional, it's exhausting anytime that I'm talking about it, whether it's something that I'm proud of or whether, I'm processing something new, it takes a toll. But I have always been somebody, I've always been kind of loud,
Yeah.
And I'm not afraid, especially at this point in my life, I'm not afraid to speak. And I know that there are a lot of people out there that it's not necessarily even a fear. There's a lot of people that are not safe to share their story. And so I've just kind of felt like that's something that I can do with where I'm at in my journey, and the ability to speak for those who can't yet.
Is that your why today?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So if you were to summarize your why, what would it be?
Yeah, it's voice. It's giving voice to the voiceless, and also having a gratitude for my own journey, not my trauma. I will never give gratitude to my trauma, but my journey and my ability to be resilient, my ability to heal, my ability to persevere no matter how bad things have gotten. And if you read the book, you'll find out they get pretty damn bad. But to overcome, I'm grateful for that.
you know, obviously this is it's heavy, it's emotional, but what makes it so emotional for you now? Like, what is flooding your mind?
It's pride. It's pride. It's the gratitude and it's the pride that I have in loving who I am and doing so much work to be able to be in a place where I love who I am and being secure enough to be able to go out and share my story with the world, and just being so humbled again by the people who give me a platform to talk about this, who embrace the story, who partner with me. You know, Supriya is now a partner of mine, Generational is a partner of mine. The work that is in front of me is never ending, and yet it's such a privilege to be in this position.
It's amazing. For my knowledge, just as I'm setting this story up, what's the correct terminology? Victim or survivor? What's the?
I love that you asked me that question, because there's such a negative connotation around the word victim.
Okay.
And yet for me, and I know for too many other people, we were never allowed to be victims in the first place. You know, whether you don't disclose and it's something that you keep hidden forever or whenever you're able to, or like in my case, you know, I did disclose and then it was like, oh, okay, you go see a therapist, they'll fix you, and this didn't really affect you. Well, me not being a victim in the first place led to so much self-hatred and so many self-destructive behaviors, you know, and I talked about that when I was 15, and I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor.
Yeah.
So it really, I think, depends on who you're talking to, right? I have embraced that word because, again, I can't be a survivor, and I definitely can't thrive from what I've been through if you don't hold space for the victim in the first place.